Rupert was one of those teachers who never managed to garner the respect of his students. To be honest, teaching wasn't so much a vocation as something he had fallen into. There were millions of people in the same situation with their jobs and their relationships. You woke up one morning and found life just sort of happened. Until today, it could be strongly argued that Rupert hadn't experienced a single passionate moment in his entire life. And all he felt now was absolute terror. He'd woken up feeling strange, as if his skin was numb and cold. At first, when he opened his eyes, he didn't realize he was no longer in control of his body. But it quickly dawned on him that something was very wrong. It felt like somebody else was in command.
"Howdy, partner,"
a voice had said to him. There had been nobody in the room, the voice evidently coming from inside his skull.
"You don't mind if I borrow you for a few hours, do you?"
The voice had then chuckled, supremely confident in the control it had gained. Have I gone insane? Rupert asked himself. He had a brother with a history of schizophrenia. Was that now cursing him too?
"Now, don't you be worrying your precious little head about such things. I have a few things I want to do, and then I'll be gone."
Rupert's vision had felt restricted. He had still been able to see and hear, but everything around him had looked like it was far away, and the sounds of the world were muffled and distorted. Only the voice had come through clearly. Rupert's terror had grown as he watched himself go about the usual morning routine. Whatever this was, it had taken complete control of his life, driving his car for him to a job he despised. For a teacher, this was a pretty good gig, a private school which was spared much of the violence that was endemic in many of the state-run schools. The pupils were from wealthy families, the school clean and well-managed. And yet Rupert was unhappy with his lot. The kids he taught were ungrateful, impudent brats, many of them spoilt by parents who earned vastly more than Rupert did. Year after year, the arrogance infected his classes. He felt he deserved more recognition for his unwavering dedication, which grew a bubbling resentment inside him. None of this was helped by the disdain the other teachers seemed to have for him. Clearly, the world had something against Rupert. He wasn't aware that this was often the thoughts of an individual who couldn't accept themselves as being the cause of their own misery. He wasn't a great teacher, but neither was he terrible, and he did enough to keep the job he had. The students he taught were nothing compared to some of the schools he could have found himself in. And the disdain he felt from his fellow teachers was mainly a projection of his own sense of inadequacy. Still, the resentment created by his own flawed thinking grew. That resentment is what the demon presently possessing him had tapped into. Sometimes, such a break in the psyche allowed a demon to slip through the body's defenses. It had taken a few tries. The nightmares Rupert experienced leaving him ragged and sleep-deprived. But Rupert had relented and said yes, not realizing what he was saying yes to. Now Rupert saw his class through another's eyes. Walking into the classroom, his students grew quiet, which was a rarity. Their teenage minds seemed to detect something was different today. The demon rode the body differently, carrying the shoulders back and putting a slight swing in the arm, carrying the briefcase. The contents of the briefcase terrified Rupert because he knew beyond any doubt what it would be used for. That had been what most of his nightmares had been about. "Good morning, class," Rupert's mouth said without his permission. There were some responses, but most were inaudible.
"Don't worry. I will make sure you get to hear their screams."
I have a special lesson for you today, class. Today we will be covering the finer points of how fear impacts the human mind. The students looked back at him, totally perplexed. Rupert was a maths teacher. If any of them realized the peril they were in, they didn't show it. "Don't do this," Rupert screamed inside.
"Relax. I'm only doing what you would have done in time."
"No, that's a lie," Rupert protested. Was he trying to convince the phantom voice or himself?
"Oh, then why did you buy the gun?"
Rupert watched as his fingers opened the briefcase, which had been strategically placed on his desk. "Now that's a beautiful piece of craftsmanship," the voice insisted. What was this inside him?
"A demon, of course, you silly goose. Now be quiet. Daddy has work to do."
Everything became a blur. He was saying things to his students, but none of it made sense. Rupert could already see the newspaper headlines that would result from this, and he tried to push himself back into control. For a second, he nearly managed it, but then a pain exploded in the center of his being as the demon slapped him back to where he now belonged.
Hey, behave yourself.
It was then that Rupert revealed the gun so that everyone could now see it. That got their attention. It was a Smith & Wesson M&P 40. It had a 15-round magazine, and there were 20 of you in this class. Assuming Rupert wasn't the best shot, how many of them would survive? The students panicked. Some threw themselves out of their chairs and bolted for the door, Rupert's hand firing several rounds off at them. He had barely ever fired the gun before, buying it on a whim nearly a year back, and his muscle memory wasn't attuned to the gun's use. This caused the gun to buck when he fired, the first shot going wide. The others hit. Even he couldn't help but hit such a grouping of human bodies. One of the male students rushed him. The jock, the sports star, wanting nothing more than to be the hero. Rupert's next bullet took the attacker in the left shoulder, and then another round into the stomach.
I could have done with this gun 700 years ago,
the demon said. By the time the magazine was empty, 8 students were lying either dead or injured. 3 had managed to escape, the rest having fled to the back of the room. This gave the demon time to figure out how to remove the magazine and replace it with the second one he had brought. It didn't take him long. The gun fired, 15 more rounds, finding flesh, bone, and the occasional chunk of wall due to poor aim. But at the end, with all the ammunition used up, there were 12 students dead and 5 severely wounded.
Come on, admit it. Deep down you enjoyed it.
Rupert told himself that was a lie.
I'm inside your head. I can read your thoughts. You are the one lying to yourself.
Was that true? Was this why Rupert had bought the gun? He had told himself it was for home defense, but he'd barely taken it out of its case since the first time he had test-fired it on the range. From outside in the corridor, Rupert could hear people running. The school had their own armed security, and the police would be arriving soon.
I've done my bit. Wow, I really enjoyed that. Good to get out and stretch my legs after so long. Well, I guess I'll be leaving you then. No point in me hanging around. To think you could do such a thing.
The demon gave a long, satisfied sigh. But it was you, Rupert protested.
And I'm sure everyone will believe you. Enjoy the rest of your life.
Rupert felt the control returning to his body, and he dropped the gun on the desk, the smell of cordite irritating his nostrils. A teacher killing his students, an event to rock the foundations of the country. The barrier separating hell weakened a little more.